If I look back over the past year, I would say we went from having very little to we have accomplished a lot. And at the grand scheme of things, like we still have so far to go, but it's, never in my career have I ever been able to say I did as many things in the past year that I have in this past year.
Whether you're going to market through dealers, distributors, or some other partner channel, the mediated sale is complex. We call it B2B to X.
But the leaders in the industry are the ones who are making it look simple. I'm John Goff.
And I'm Kyler Mason, and this is Why You Win, presented by Element 3.
Today's guest is Kelly Kiger, the VP of Commercial Sales at Workhorse Truck. In our conversation, we talk about maintaining a startup mentality, the different geographic readiness for electric vehicles across the United States, and how they're helping their customers and their dealers move effectively from internal combustion to electrification. We hope you enjoy. All right, Kelly, welcome to the show today. We're so glad that you're here with us. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we're just going to jump right into it. You're the Vice President of Commercial Vehicle Sales at Workhorse. You've been there for a little bit now. Tell us, what's your role and what does that mean inside of your organization now?
So I took the role thinking this is going to be a lot of sales-driven activity. And it is somewhat, but it's a lot more of when you work for a startup, you are all things to all people. So I'm also doing a lot of sales operations. I'm helping the finance team invoice dealers. We're setting up a dealer network. We're setting up programs to purchase. So I've got a field team that's doing all the selling, and I'm more of acting like a support there and focus on all the kind of internal activities we're doing at Workhorse to go from mature startup to a full-on OEM.
What's the difference between the two in your mind? You listed a couple of areas that you're helping, but what's the distinction you see?
So we call ourselves a mature startup because we've actually been in business for a couple of decades. We used to do ICE chassis back in the day, and now probably 2015-ish, we sold a bunch of hybrid units, and now we're full EV. So we've done a kind of a full circle. So that's why I call it a mature startup instead of just like a startup that just started. I think the difference between us and like a full-fledged OEM is the processes. I think when you work for a large corporation, you have processes that define processes, and you've got people to rely on. And when you're at a startup, you have to wear multiple hats because you don't have the folks working for us to do. You can't call up somebody and say, hey, go do this because there's a process for it, because somebody has to invent the process. So there's that. Lots of lessons to learn at a startup. So you have all these people coming from other companies that have tons of experience. And so you're taking all of those ideas and those experiences and you're trying to formulate what works best for this company. And then you have to put those ideas into practice. And a lot of it is kind of trial and error because, again, you don't have people to go out and figure things out and work on one thing all the time. When I worked at Gilbarco Veeder-Root, they're very focused on lean manufacturing. And I thought what they did was lean. Mm-hmm. Startup business is lean. It is bare bones and lots of people doing lots of things. So I guess that's kind of the difference between a startup and a traditional OEM.
Was that a hard transition for you from a more, let's say, established?
For sure. The process of starting the initial sale to when we delivered the vehicle was established. You have to establish floor plan lines, establishing a dealer network. When I worked for Mac, it's a 100-year-old company that's had a dealer network for almost as long, and they're selling trucks through the dealers, and they've got national account processes. And coming here, and when I started, we only had 2 dealers. I think we're up to about 16 now. That's a whole nother sales process than selling a truck. Is to tell a dealer who majority of our dealers are traditional ICE dealers. So is the goal to sell an ICE dealer on becoming an EV dealer, or is the goal to take someone who wants to be an EV dealer and sell them on why Workhorse is the company they want to work with? So lots of, navigating those types of sales techniques along the way.
If you were to distill down the one thing that you'd say the business counts on you for, I know there's a lot because you just went through a ton of stuff, but what would you say that one thing is?
There's myself, a couple other members of the sales team, and our upfit sales manager all come from the trucking industry. So looking to me for leadership, and when you were at this company, how did you do this? And can we implement that here? Or what do we need to change from that process to make it work for us? You know, vehicles are vehicles, but there's so much difference in the automotive space than there is in the trucking space. And even like down to how you transact with your dealers and how the dealers work with the customer. Because like when you go to a Toyota dealership, for example, the Toyota rep isn't there trying to help you buy your Camry. In the trucking industry, a lot of times the factory rep is the one who sometimes makes that first introduction with the customer, and then they bring the dealer in. So it's just the whole process is different. And, you know, some of our folks that are from the automotive side having to change that dynamic on what the difference between the two different types of dealers are. And then just the terminology used. So, you know, you've got MSRP in the car world. A lot of times the trucks go by list price, just little things like that to try to influence us to become a trucking OEM.
What's the thing that you have to teach people most often? Like just surprises people coming out of other industry and into this one specifically?
So people don't realize that there are laws around how you sell vehicles that protect the dealers mostly in a good way. And it keeps OEMs from selling direct to customers. So a lot of times we get, well, let's go quote that customer. Well, we can't quote the customer. We can lead them down the path. We can show and tell the vehicles. We can sell them on why Workhorse is a winning vehicle, but we have to have the dealer involved in some part of the process because they're the ones who ultimately quote the customer and do the fun transactions with them. That sometimes comes as maybe not a surprise, but people forget that part of the process. So
I think that your insight about that influence sale and where the OEM sits sort of sometimes frustratingly on the outside of that transaction moment is like people get frustrated, especially in like a direct to consumer world where we're very used to being able to swipe our credit cards and have things show up. Like that's not how this industry works. And it doesn't matter how much you want it to. There are reasons that it can't behave that way. And so we have to play in the rules. Yes.
And it also very quickly will show you who your high performing dealers are versus who your are sit back and wait and let's see what happens dealers. I mean, that's a make it or break it for a startup company that's going to market through a nationwide dealer network. Is they have to be aggressive. They have to be on, you know, knocking on doors. This is like old school selling, cold calling, showing up in the morning, bringing donuts. So they have to be the boots on the ground because I have an East Coast sales manager, I have a West Coast sales director, I have a California salesman, and I have a national account salesperson. And as much as we would like to touch every single transaction, it's just not physically possible. So having really strong dealers makes a huge difference.
So given your stage of where you're at, moving from maturing startup to, did you say mature?
Yes.
Where do you feel like you guys are crushing it right now?
So we have some really good contacts from all of our previous lives. So we're doing a really great job of pulling in those past relationships and talking about why it's important to at least, you know, review an EV, demo an EV, especially in California, because you're working with all the compliance regulations and they're going to have to start making that transition. So a lot of it's Class 8 customers that also have some medium duty fleet. There's quite a few members of our team that are certified transportation professionals, which is through a group called NPTC. If you're not familiar, that's the National Private Truck Council. So a lot of fleets that manage their own transportation go and participate in that. So we participate in that, and that's how you meet people. So anyway, we take all these relationships from this history of being in the industry and these various groups, and we give them a demo. We give them a 30-day demo and just, you know, try it out, put it on a route. We'll send an engineer out there to ride along with your drivers so they can be there to answer questions and remind them to use the parking brake and, you know, that you have an HVAC and the HVAC is not going to kill your battery just because you sit in traffic for 20 minutes. And a lot of kind of what we do as part of the sales process is it's a consultative. So they don't know a lot about EVs. So it's more about it's more about why Workhorse wins, but this is how. So this is how the battery works, and overcoming those kind of stigma about, if I don't leave my house at 100% charge, my battery's going to die in 3 hours. Or if I get stuck in traffic and have the AC on, my battery's going to die. Or I can only go, even though they said I can go 150 miles, I can really only go 80. So here, have it and try it and overcome those things that scare you so you feel comfortable sending your drivers out in an electric vehicle.
You just made an awesome connection that was like in line with the premise of the show, that how you're winning is by way of your consultative approach, the depth of experience and relationships in the industry to educate on the kind of the end of the line buyer, the fleets, and that is a part of your equation right now. What you're doing there and how is why you guys are winning or on your way to winning. Something I'm also trying to sort through. You're like carrying two big priorities, it appears, and expand the dealer network and also like go direct to fleets from a relationship building and an education standpoint. Like, how do you balance those two things when they both take, I'm imagining, tons of time and resources to pull off? Like, what are you doing?
We definitely work a lot. Being at a startup is not an 8 to 5 kind of job, and I'm sure you guys know that. So initially it was throw a couple of regional folks in there, have them establish a dealership network, and then we'll go after accounts. And then we kind of quickly realized that by the time we make it through the sales process with the dealer, we're 6 months behind where we should be. So we need to do these things simultaneously. And that's when it kind of opened the eyes to the executive team that we really needed a national account person. Even if that's not the person that had the relationship to start with, the fact that somebody else can do kind of that warm transfer to him and then he can run with it. And then that way our regional folks can really focus on the dealers, number one, and then those very important but sometimes smaller regional fleets that maybe just run the West Coast. So our national account guy focuses on all these major fleets that are running coast to coast or have delivery routes in all the states. And then our regional guys are really the ones there with the dealers day to day, helping them quote, helping them do demos, helping them get in with the smaller fleets. So we're trying to balance it out. It's not a balance yet. I mean, one day we'll have a salesman on every corner is my goal, whether that's a dealer salesman or an expanded field sales team. And we'll be able to hit, everybody under the sun and not have to be as, we could call on every one truck fleet, sure, but it makes more sense from a business perspective to call on someone that's got a couple hundred trucks or a couple thousand trucks. And then we get those guys on board, and then we can kind of get a larger sales team and have a smaller focus.
How do you get them to take your calls?
So back to sales 101, it's a lot of follow-up without using the words follow-up because that's not cool anymore.
Just following up here.
Yeah, you can't say that anymore. So lots of emails, lots of phone calls, lots of LinkedIn. So friends that are linked in with friends, certainly trade shows. I mean, it's the double-edged sword. It's a ton of money and time and effort in sending people in a booth and trucks. But at the same time, where else can you hit 50 or 75% of the fleet managers in 1 week, and they're coming to you for a large part of it. So yes, it's a huge investment, but yes, we get a lot out of it at the same time. So I'd say we use a lot of resources, like when you get the list of the attendees, we try to offer more of a white glove situation because, these are new trucks to people. It's not like calling up somebody and telling them, hey, it's your buying cycle is up for this year and it's time to do some replacement trucks. And what are you going to take? It's, this is what being battery electric means. And this is your impact on the environment. And sometimes it's learning what the people care about, like there's some people that don't care about the environment, but they're being told to buy EVs. And there's some people who are extremely passionate about the environment and making that transition to zero emission. And then there's people in the middle that are like, I think I care about this, but I don't know why. And I probably should be investing in alternate fuels, but I'm still not real sure. And so, you gotta work with what you're presented by changing the conversation to meet the needs of the person you're meeting with.
When you get that connection, and you've really found out what are the things that are driving, I don't know, pain or decision making with your potential customers, is getting the demo truck in their hands one of the keys to your success? Like, what is that? Is that a thing
Yes.
that really helps to improve your conversion rate?
So it's new technology. So just like when Apple came out with their first cell phone, I think a lot of us stuck with our flip phones for a generation or two before we were like, okay, let's go in with this smartphone thing. It's the same way with these trucks. Regardless of how much great experience our team has and our factory has, people are still a little weary of the technology. And there's lots of myths. Some of them are accurate, some of them are not. And so providing a demo is where they can really like touch it and it's real, and we can drive it down the road and the battery didn't explode or whatever crazy thing these people have been told or they've heard. And and then passenger car led the way. So Prius and Tesla and some of those other guys got rid of some of those myths before we came on board, but now our truck is larger and it's got more payload. And how does that affect having 4 battery packs instead of just the 1 battery that we have with passenger cars? So demo really allows them to get over whatever their hesitations are. It's funny because at the end of the demos, some of the drivers are like, gosh, I don't want to give it back because I'd rather drive this than my ICE chassis that I've been driving for 15 years. Because there's a lot of things that make driving EVs easier on the driver. I mean, the one pedal driving that you get with those types of vehicles, you don't have to slam on the brakes to stop. You just kind of let off the accelerator, and you have the brake if you need it, but it's one pedal driving, and that's easier on drivers. And lots of little nuances like that they don't understand until they really get in the driver's seat and take off. A lot of companies can't hold on to drivers. It's a difficult position to fill. So if you can give the drivers a truck that they enjoy driving, that really helps your retention rates with your employees. So
I was just going to reinforce that point. When I got in the truck and was driving it around the convention center in that ride and drive test, I was surprised at how easy it was to drive. I am not a truck driver. It's not anywhere close to my talents or capabilities, but it was easy. And it was I think I could do that if I had to do that on a regular basis.
What are you guys doing to position yourself to win, in addition to a lot of what we've been talking about, like really hard work, relationships? We haven't talked a ton about the dealer expansion strategy, but what are you doing to break through the competitive nature of the market right now?
Well, dealer network strategy is probably at the top of our list. I think there's kind of 2 different ideals around having dealers, and some of the EV startups have also chosen to go with the dealer network, and some have chosen to do more of an in-house dealer situation. And so for us, that makes a huge difference because, like I said earlier, that's how we get to the fleets that we wouldn't know because they've had long-standing relationships with them and sold them trucks in the past. I think the second piece is we really took an opposite approach of some of the other EV startups where they hired a sales team and they kind of created the technology and presented it before they were ready to manufacture. We took the opposite. We hired all the engineers, we designed the truck, we built the truck, we got manufacturing readiness, and then we hired the sales team at the end. So we wanted to show that, we have the capability to make whatever amount of trucks that you want to order. And our engineers work for us and our factory works for us. And so we offer this whole package. We're not selling you on a PowerPoint. We're selling you by dropping off this truck and it's real and it drives down the road. Last year when we first launched our W56, that was kind of our sales pitch was we drove this truck from the factory to the show. We didn't create it with 3D parts and put it together in the garage and then pull it in here. Telling that story for us is how we accomplish all those pieces of being a truck OEM was a big deal. And I think people can appreciate that because of their relationships with traditional OEMs. So that's what they know and what they're familiar with. And it takes that kind of scary technology piece out of it. And then also our truck was designed from the ground up. So we didn't take a chassis that was meant for a traditional ICE vehicle and try to convert it into an EV. We built the entire thing around safety and quality to where customers could feel secure in the car and not, or in the truck, and not be worried about, whatever could possibly happen, because the chassis and the drivetrain are kind of two different things being forced together, not being built from the ground up together.
So it sounds like you were describing a chapter where it's like sell it and then build it with fancy PowerPoints, and that, through talking with you before and other discussions, has left a bad taste in the mouths of the industry, and trust issues. It sounds like you guys are coming into the season of we drove it here, and engineering first, and really proving you have a quality product. How long do you think that message? How long do you think the shelf life is for that message until the industry matures and catches up, and there are really quality companies and products that can say the same thing as what you guys have been doing?
We're probably in that transition now. I think the majority of those who started out with the technology but didn't have the truck are in the process of getting the manufacturing side of the house going. I think once, we're all in the same spot where we all have factories and we all have working lines, then we just win on how the truck runs. We set a standard that we sell by, and we meet those standards in the field. So we've always been focused on safety. We've always been focused on, driver comfort and making it the best experience that they can have. We've been focused on performance. So it's a purpose-built vehicle. We knew what we wanted for payload and range and cargo capacity, and we've met those. And a lot of that was based on feedback from the field. So we tried to we built a truck that customers wanted instead of building the truck and telling people what they needed. So I think that's our position going forward now that other people are in the manufacturing space and not just in the technology space.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the difference between transitioning an ICE dealer to EV versus trying to sort of grow up an EV dealer, somebody who wants to be that from the very beginning. Is there one that's easier than the other? Is there a preference that Workhorse has?
Yes.
That you have?
Yes, a dealer who is interested in being in the EV space is much easier to transition than one who we just approach blindly and say, hey, we need a dealer in this market and we know you're high performing. Are you interested in having an EV line? Because, that sales process is twice as long. We have to first sell them on why they need to be an EV dealer, and then we have to start talking about the trucks. The other flip side of it is they're already ready to be an EV dealer, and all we're having to do is talk about trucks. So that would be our preference. Our preference is a dealer in every major market calls us up and goes, hey, I am so interested in being an EV dealer, and I love your lineup of trucks, and come, let me sign the dealer agreement. That does not happen very often, unfortunately. So we do try to go after markets. We identified 17 markets probably 18-ish months ago and sat down with our executive team and the field sales team, and we're like, this is where we want dealers. And the reason is these are markets with charging capabilities. They have incentives, or they are following some of what CARB is doing in California. There was a multitude of reasons why we chose those markets. So that's what the goal has been for the sales team, is to hit those markets and get dealers signed up there. I mean, honestly, California is the easiest sell. They have mandates in place. Some of the New England states have incentives, so that's a little bit easier sell. I think the Midwest and South is probably more of an uphill battle. And I started with Workhorse as the Southeast and Southwest sales manager. And I remember the woman who hired me was like, this is not going to be an easy job, just so you're aware in advance. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I know all these dealers. I know all these customers. And then you're calling and you're like, no, thanks, no, thanks. And you're like, okay, she was right.
Even with your relationships, you were getting quick, no thank yous.
Oh, yeah. There are very strong feelings about making that transition. And so that's why having the West kind of balances out the Southeast and the Midwest, because we have 6 dealers in California and we have one dealer with 2 locations from the Atlantic Ocean through Texas. So
Wow.
that's kind of the difference in the dealer network makeup. So the South will come around, but the majority of those 17 markets are in New England and on the West Coast.
So I just heard the call to action for the podcast is dealers who are interested in introducing electric line. Call Kelly, please.
Yes, especially in the Florida markets and in the Carolinas.
Florida and Carolinas.
That must be a business priority.
Florida has a major port in Miami, amongst other ports. But our truck is pretty perfect for that pickup from the port and go out to the major areas. We get about 150, 200 mile range. So something like that outside of Miami is kind of perfect for our medium duties.
I was just thinking about the South and the East has a couple of like really good reasons to care about electrification. Like the battery manufacturing in the United States is primarily in the South. I think Volvo Cars, right, has a huge plant, or is it Volkswagen? Which one?
So Toyota has a plant. BMW has a plant. Volvo Trucks is in Virginia.
Yeah.
So there's lots of manufacturing facilities in the Southeast. Freightliner has a manufacturing facility. Kenworth is in Texas. So
A lot of the economy that is like already built to support that system, and now we just have to move hearts and minds a little bit.
you're doing my job for me. Look at you.
You're not alone. You're like, yeah, man, tell me about it.
You need another salesperson.
Yeah. When can you start?
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Question for you. So you've been in the industry a while. You've made this transition to Workhorse and are wearing a lot of hats. You've brought a lot of leadership. What is something that you would say is advice you'd give someone that's making similar transition to you?
That's a good question. So first, I would probably tell them that you need to stay open-minded and don't listen to what some of your former colleagues are going to tell you in a negative sense, because there's nothing easy about working at a startup. It is rewarding by far, but it is not easy. So don't let people who have been working for these traditional OEMs for 20 years, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should stay here. This is a steady job. You've got benefits and you've got good salary. I did, and it was great, but there's no days where I'm like, gosh, I have just been bored all day today and I cannot find one more thing to do. Like, that's never the case. When I sign off at the end of the day, there's 37 other things I could have stayed online to do, but I know I have to go be a mom and be that person to other people in the evenings. But yeah, I would just say it's hard work. It's rewarding for sure. So if I look back over the past year, I would say we went from having very little to we have accomplished a lot. And at the grand scheme of things, like we still have so far to go, but it's, never in my career have I ever been able to say I did as many things in the past year that I have in this past year. Mm-hmm. And then also the second part of that is you can't let your feelings get hurt, because you're going to be told no more times than you're going to be told yes, both by the company and by your customers and your dealers. And I mean, I guess it's like a thick skin kind of thing. Like, you got to look at no as a challenge, not as like a negative thing. Like, when I present an idea and they're like, I don't think that'll work. Well, how can I manipulate this idea to make it better or change or show them that it will be important to have that as part of our business? And the same thing goes with the customers and the dealers. Not everybody's going to buy from you. I think if that was the case, our jobs would be very easy and we wouldn't have to promote our trucks. It's all, just learning how to get through the no's. When I worked for Enterprise, they have a 3 no policy. I sell you this, and you say no, and then I sell it a different way, and you say no, and then I get to sell it a third way, and you say no, and that's when I can go, okay, I give up. You're not going to take it. And I don't know what it is about that has just burned in my brain. And like, when people tell me no, I'm like, give me a minute. I'll be right back. And I'm going to have something else for you. So yeah, being thick-skinned and overcoming your objections, even if it's not sales-related objections.
That's great.
I mean, I think that's just incredible advice. Just the confidence that builds in a person to be willing to make bets and take shots and just see what sticks. And it's not always just throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? It doesn't have to be random. It can be thoughtful and calculated.
Yeah, and we learned that because, and a lot of it was, seeing what sticks. And now we can go, okay, well, this is what I did here, and this is what we tried here, and it didn't work. So how can I combine these two things and find something that does ultimately work for us? And as much as my experience and a lot of our experience is these traditional OEMs, not all of that translates to EV. So we can take our experience, but we're going to have to change it and make it to where it works in this environment, where some of it does translate very easily. But EV is just kind of a different ballgame. You got, I know you guys have already heard this, but all the less parts means less service. So that's a whole different, that's part of we were talking about dealers earlier. That's where they make their money, on parts and service. Well, when you're giving them a truck that doesn't need service and it's got 40 to 60% less parts, how do we retrain them on how to sell an EV and make enough margin up front to cover what they would have gotten in parts and service on an ICE truck? So little things like that, that's not something I ever thought about when I sold diesel. We were like, who cares? Sell it at cost. Doesn't matter. You guys are going to make all this money on parts and service, and the truck's going to be on the road for 12 years. And now it's like, you can't make your margins that slim, Mr. Dealer, because that might be, you're not going to see this truck for a while because it's going to be on the road and it doesn't need an oil change.
How do you fix that for the dealer?
So you have to work with them on, we set MSRP or list price, and then we have our DNET or dealer pricing. So we have to work with them on what makes sense to keep them in business, but also sell the truck. So our pricing strategy has certainly changed over the past year because they were looking at us to help them, and we were looking at them to go, oh, you guys are the dealers. You know what you're doing. They do know what they're doing, but they're all mostly new to EV. So we had to kind of find a common ground where we said, it's great to price it at that, but make sure you're covering your own costs and expenses and marketing. Yeah. So where's that sweet spot in the middle that keeps you in business, and then also it keeps the customers coming back for more? So that's another process we had to learn there.
And an industry that it's like in the middle of a disruption that you really have to help, right? I think there's some places in the world where a new entrant can come and disrupt the thing, and they're just delighted that they don't have to worry about all the old rules. And that's just not at all true for reasons that we've talked about. You have to still play by those rules and live in the ecosystem and help everyone in the process win along the way as you are actively disrupting the system that existed.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people will talk about transition, zero emissions, we're doing the right things. And then you'll see online where they're like, EV's never going to work. It's going to come crashing down. There's a lot of influencing, by people. So I try to align myself with not people that are like, everyone should drive an EV all day long, every day, and it's the only option. But people that are like, why would we not accept this new technology and put it in? And it doesn't have to replace every truck all at once. And what's wrong with having multiple options? Is CNG a better option for you? Maybe, but battery electric is also a great option. And when hydrogen cell comes out, that's probably also an option. So there's nothing wrong with having all these options, but we don't need to put the hard brakes on diesel. We have to be diesel for life. No other options. And I think Workhorse aligning ourselves with influencers that feel like that. And then our sales team on social media, aligning ourselves with people like that and kind of resharing those thoughts and sentiments that we are disrupting. And I totally get that, but it's disrupting in a positive manner because everyone is building, not everyone, but all the major OEMs are building a battery electric, and they're headed down the hydrogen path and what other alternate fuels. So why should we not grab onto their coattails and go with them? And let's make this transition together. And I don't understand, I guess, why people are so opposed to it. So we're disrupting the industry by allowing for new types of fuels to come in, and then so aligning ourselves with people that promote that and support that. At the end of the day, we're not trying to put ICE manufacturers out of business. We know that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And really, honestly, not trying to put my competition out of business either, because we have to have an EV industry. So some of these startups have to make it for any of us to make it. So we're not opposed to calling out our competition on what a good job they're doing. I don't want to lose sales to them, but they got to sell something to make it, and I got to sell something to make it.
Yeah, you got to drive industry forward and infrastructure forward and adoption and education. It's a massive job that one startup isn't going to pull that off.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
totally get it. John, what else do you got to know?
I got to know if you are taking that sales training of getting 3 no's and teaching that to your children.
My children don't need to be taught that no is not an answer. They are very aware that they can argue with me on anything. I looked at one of my sons one day and I was like, why do you argue with me about everything? And my mom was like, hello, he learned it from you. He didn't just wake up one day and start arguing. You've argued with him since he was little. It's very true. We have very different views on life. And so we have lots of passionate conversations. But yeah, they'll all be good attorneys or salespeople or something one day.
There you go.
They've got a great model. Kelly, thanks so much for being on. This has been an awesome conversation. Learned a lot from you. Anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
I would say being open to new experiences and doing something that you're not comfortable with the majority of the time is fully worth the experience.
That's perfect.
Love that. Great
Great.
punctuation.
Yeah, on the spot. That was it.
Why You Win is presented by Element 3, a marketing firm focused on modernizing go-to-market strategies for manufacturers that sell through complex distribution channels. We help leaders solve problems across demand generation, sales channel support, and brand development.
If you'd like more from myself or John, connect with us on LinkedIn. And for more from Element 3, visit element3.com. That's element, THREE.com.